Here's my setup for finally loading my engine and transmission into Maggie. What I've done is I've lowered the front end by taking the wheels off, putting the car down on jack stands. This stuff on the bottom underneath, it's not sitting on there. I'm actually going to remove that. I've lowered the front and I've raised up the back. I don't know if you can see that. Let me try to get you a good perspective of that. If you come over to the front of the car, you'll see that it's actually quite low. That makes it much easier for me, and you can see that the car, if I just put the camera level here, I guess it doesn't really show very well, but the back is at an angle. That allows me to have to tilt the engine and transmission together less to get it into the car. And the height over here at the front from the floor up to the top is quite a bit smaller. Less distance I have to raise the engine. Now, when I originally took the engine and transmission out, I separated them in the engine compartment. And a lot of people are proponents of doing it that way, taking it out two pieces. First the engine, then the transmission. That's the way I did it originally, and I was planning on putting it back that way. However, in preparation for that, I decided to try a preliminary made-up of the transmission to the engine. And I did that by supporting the transmission on I had both the engine supported on one mover's dolly, and as well as this wooden box that I've made to fit the bottom of the engine. And I used another mover's dolly with some blocking wood, as you can see over there, underneath the transmission. And just by adjusting the wood, the height of the wood, I was able to slide it directly right into the engine. Well, once I did that, it was so easy, and I remembered how rather difficult it might be getting those two to mate up at just the right angle together while inside the engine compartment. I decided to at least give it a try with the whole assembly bolted together. So I'm going to try that. If it doesn't work out, you'll see this video as a how not to do video. So that's the plan. And as a result of trying to lift the engine with the transmission connected, that changed all my conclusions on where I should attach the gear to the, this is just hanging down loose here right now for overnight, getting ready. But that changed my conclusions on where I should attach the lifting gear. And so what I decided to do is do it just the way it shows in the some of the manuals, where you can actually buy lifting tabs that go over this central screw here that holds the middle of the rocker arm assembly down, and another one back here. I was worried about those. They're not as heavy as these screws that hold the heads down, but the engine rebuilders did not want me to disturb the head bolts now that it's all assembled. So I want my warranty to work, so we're respecting their wishes. So I attached the lifting gear with the load leveler on those two bolts with some heavy washers on either side here. And to my pleasant surprise, when this lifted, it lifted quite easily. The load lever allows me to change the angle. And I didn't get any, I was concerned when I was loading the engine about a tilt like this. And so I tinkered with a lot of the settings. These mount points are directly centered, but with the transmission attached, it seems to lift with hardly any angle this way or that way. There was no adjustment needed. So that's the way I'm going to do that. I've got the bolts attaching the lifting gear down as far as I can on the threads. And I'm not going to leave it hanging very long. I've also got Oil in the transmission. The transmission rebuilder said that was no problem. And I realized I was going to take the oil out of the engine, and then I realized it's just sitting down in the sump at this point. And it doesn't seem to affect the weight very much on the lifting. So there's also oil in there. So we're going to leave that alone. So that's the setup, and in a little while we'll be doing what we can and give it a shot at putting the engine and transmission into the car. Over on this side, I think you can see the angle that's resulted better by looking at the height of the jack stands. Over here they're very low up front, and they get quite a bit higher. Out back you can see how high the wheel is off the ground on the back and how low the front is where the rotor is close to the ground. Now, I may have to lift up that front a little because I'm concerned about the clearance of the legs over here on the lifter. I may need to jack the car up in order for these legs to slide under without interfering with the rotors. That's something I'm going to check right now. Just as I suspected, the clearance between the bottom of the rotor and the garage floor was not sufficient to pass the bottom of the engine hoist underneath it. So I have raised the front of the car up another inch or two, about an inch and a half, and I've also made some adjustments over here on the hoist. And I took the engine off, pushed the hoist underneath, made sure it fit. So we'll have to lift the engine a little bit higher, about an inch and a half, but at least I won't run into some interference underneath the car as I'm pushing it forward. Well, we have liftoff, hopefully. Looks like we're clearing. I can go a little higher. We'll see what happens next. Tight quarters here. I'm about at the maximum of my tilt and then the maximum of my height. So if we make it, we're going to make it by the skin of our teeth. Still got clearance underneath in the front, which is what's the really important part. Well, look at that. Gearbox in, bolt in. This required push this way, lower, push it a little more, lower. The end here wants to get over there, where the flange is, wants to get caught over here. You have to get in here and kind of lift it. When you lift it, it hits there, so then you have to lower the engine a little. You just have to do a little bit increment each time, but you definitely have to have somebody over on this side kind of like lifting and pulling while you're messing with the engine. Over to the engine compartment. Man, once that bolt is in, the motor mounts on the left side. Here's the bracket for the coil. I got one bolt in there so far. I'm afraid you can't see that. The light's not that great. But that one's lined up. I'm going to get the rest of the bolts in, then we're going to do the other side. Here's a view of the right side engine mount with the ground strap attached. It was amazing that once I got the bolt in the single bolt that mounts the transmission in the back, which is attached to the engine here, these holes from the engine to the motor mounts lined up almost dead on. Just a little wiggle and the bolts went right through.